I never imagined a day would come when I'd look in the mirror and question who was staring back at me. For the longest time I thought I understood myself, my likes, my limits, and my place in the world. But looking back now, I realize I was just living inside a carefully built shell, shaped by what others wanted me to be. I wasn't really living as me. I was performing a version of myself that everyone else seemed comfortable with. It started subtly, like a whisper in the back of my mind I couldn't ignore. Curiosity I couldn't explain. There wasn't some big dramatic moment or sudden change. Just small, quiet things that kept building up over time. I remember the first time I noticed it clearly. I was around 16, cleaning up my sister's room while she was away at a friend's house. It wasn't something I did often, but she'd left such a mess, and I couldn't stand seeing it. I found her favorite scarf lying across the bed, light and soft, with this faint lavender scent that somehow made the whole room feel calm. I picked it up just to fold it, but when the fabric brushed against my skin, something strange happened. Froze. It wasn't just the softness of it. It was the feeling it gave me. For a brief second, I imagined what it might feel like to wear something like that, to feel light, graceful, and free. I shook the thought away as fast as it came. I laughed it off, told myself it was weird, and buried it under a pile of excuses. But even after that day, the thought stayed with me. I'd catch myself noticing details I wasn't supposed to care about. The way my female friends carried themselves, how their clothes moved when they walked, the quiet confidence they seemed to have when they smiled. I envied it, though I couldn't admit that to anyone, not even myself. It wasn't about attraction. It was about expression. Something deeper that words never seemed to capture. Growing up, I was always told that being a man meant being strong, serious, and unshakable. My father believed in traditional roles, and my friends, well, they believed in teasing anyone who didn't fit the mold. So I hid that part of me, buried it deep, and pretended it didn't exist. I told myself it was just curiosity, just imagination, just something that would go away once I grew older. But it never did. The older I got, the heavier that quiet feeling became. It was like carrying a secret that got louder every time I ignored it. I'd go to school, act like everyone else, make jokes, talk about sports, and laugh along with my friends, but inside I felt like I was living a double life, one that I hadn't even begun to understand. Strange, really. The moments that change your life don't always look dramatic when they happen. They can be small, ordinary, almost invisible to everyone else. But inside they shake your entire world. For me, that scarf moment was one of them. Another came a few months later when my sister left for college. She had this box of old clothes she didn't want anymore, and my mom told me to take it up to the attic. I remember carrying it up, setting it down, and just staring at it. Something inside me wanted to open it. I told myself I just wanted to check what was inside before storing it away. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just curiosity. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. There were dresses, tops, skirts, things I had never imagined myself touching. My heart was racing, but I couldn't look away. Each piece of fabric seemed to hold a story, a personality, a freedom I couldn't name. And then, without thinking, I reached in and picked up a simple, soft sweater. It was cream-colored, plain, nothing fancy, but as soon as I held it up to my chest, I felt this wave of calm I hadn't felt in years. It was like I could finally breathe. But that calm quickly turned into guilt. What was I doing? Why did it feel right when everything I'd been taught said it was wrong? I shoved the sweater back into the box, closed it tightly, and stepped back as if I'd done something terrible. I told myself I'd forget it. I didn't. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed that moment over and over. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of something I wouldn't be able to stop. A quiet awakening that would challenge everything I thought I knew about myself. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, but how could I? Who would understand that I wasn't trying to be someone else, that I was just trying to find myself? So I kept it hidden. I smiled through conversations, went about my daily life, but every now and then, that same curiosity whispered again. Soft, persistent, impossible to silence. It wasn't about wanting attention or trying to stand out. In fact, it was the opposite. I wanted peace, a sense of belonging, a feeling that I could finally stop pretending. But at 16, I didn't have the words to describe that. All I knew was that something inside me felt different. And that difference scared me. Years later, when I look back on that version of myself, confused, scared, but secretly curious, I can see how all of it was leading to something. Every whisper, every stolen glance, every moment of guilt and curiosity was pushing me toward the truth I didn't yet have the courage to face. Back then, though, I couldn't see that. I just thought I was broken. I remember sitting in my room one evening, the sunset pouring through the window, painting everything gold. I looked at my reflection and wondered what would happen if I stopped fighting it, if I just let myself feel what I was feeling. But then the fear returned, stronger than ever. What would my family say? What would my friends think? Would I lose everything if I let them see the real me? I pushed the thought away again, but this time it didn't disappear. It lingered, waiting for the right moment to come back. And when it did, it would change everything. That was the beginning of my journey, the quiet, uncertain first step into something I didn't yet understand. I didn't know it then, but that small, hesitant spark would one day grow into the courage to embrace my feminine side. Not because I wanted to escape who I was, but because I wanted to finally meet the version of me that had been waiting all along. If the beginning of my story was a quiet whisper, then the next part was the storm that followed. It started slowly, almost invisibly, but once it began, there was no stopping it. The older I got, the harder it became to keep pretending. On the outside, I still played the same role everyone expected. The reliable son, the calm friend, the one who never caused trouble. But inside, I was at war with myself. Every day felt like walking a tightrope between who I was supposed to be and who I was becoming. I remember when I left for college. It was supposed to be a new start, a fresh chapter where I could finally be myself, or at least figure out who that was. But even there, surrounded by new faces and endless freedom, I carried my secret like a shadow that never left my side. I told myself I'd focus on studies, stay busy, and keep my thoughts in check. That plan lasted about a month. Then came the first night I was left alone in the dorm. My roommate had gone home for the weekend, and I suddenly had space. Real, silent space. I opened my closet and looked at the same old jeans and hoodies. They felt heavy, dull, lifeless. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to understand why I felt so out of place in my own skin. That's when I remembered the box from my sister's room, the one I'd hidden away years ago. I didn't have it with me, but the memory of how I'd felt that day came back so clearly that my chest tightened. I realized I missed that feeling, that calm, that strange sense of rightness. So I did something that night I never thought I'd do. I opened my laptop and searched for clothes online. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Just something soft, something gentle, something that didn't scream for attention but whispered comfort. My hands trembled as I scrolled. Every click felt like crossing an invisible line. I found a simple blouse, pale blue, nothing extravagant. I don't know why, but it reminded me of peace. I stared at it for a long time before I finally clicked buy. For days after, I panicked. What if someone saw the package? What if the delivery came when my roommate was around? What if this was all a mistake? But when it finally arrived, I couldn't stop myself from opening it. It was just fabric, nothing special. But the moment I held it, I felt like I was holding a piece of something I'd lost long ago. Something that belonged to me. I waited until late at night when I was sure no one would come by. I locked the door, took a deep breath, and put it on. The moment it touched my skin, something inside me softened. The world didn't collapse, lightning didn't strike, and yet everything changed. I looked in the mirror and saw a version of myself that wasn't pretending. For the first time, I didn't see confusion or guilt. Saw peace. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, feeling, existing. It wasn't about trying to look like someone else. It was about finally feeling like me. But peace doesn't last long when it's built on secrets. The next morning, the fear came rushing back. I folded the blouse, hid it at the back of my closet, and told myself it was just a moment of weakness. I promised I'd focus on my classes and forget it ever happened. But I couldn't. The memory of how it felt lingered in every thought, every glance at the mirror. It wasn't something I could unfeel, and that scared me more than anything. Over the next few months, I started to spiral between two worlds. During the day, I'd go to lectures, laugh with friends, and pretend everything was normal. But at night, when everyone else slept, I'd take out that blouse again and stare at it. Sometimes I'd wear it, sometimes I'd just hold it. Each time the guilt hit me harder. I'd ask myself, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just be normal? But deep down I knew the answer. There was nothing wrong with me, I was just scared of what was right. One weekend, everything nearly fell apart. My roommate came back early from a trip. I hadn't expected him for another day. So when he suddenly opened the door, I froze. I'd been sitting by the mirror wearing that same blouse. For a second, time stopped. He just stared, confused, eyes wide. I felt the blood drain from my face. Without thinking, I muttered something. A joke, an excuse I don't even remember. I just remember the look on his face. Not anger, not disgust, just confusion and discomfort. He didn't say anything. He just turned around and left the room. I sat there in silence, trembling. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. That night I couldn't sleep. Every noise in the hallway made me jump. I waited for him to come back and confront me, but he never did. The next day, he acted like nothing had happened. But something had changed, not just between us but inside me. I realized how fragile my secret really was. For weeks, I lived in constant fear. Every time someone laughed nearby, I wondered if it was about me. Every time my roommate glanced at me, I wondered what he was thinking. But as much as the fear hurt, there was another feeling underneath it, a strange sense of relief. The secret had cracked open, even if only a little. And that small crack made me realize I couldn't keep hiding forever. Still, I wasn't ready. Not yet. I kept pretending, kept playing the part everyone wanted to see. But the more I tried to suppress that part of me, the more it fought back. I started to feel disconnected from everything. I'd walk through crowds and feel invisible, like I was living a life that didn't belong to me. My grades dropped, I stopped going out as much, and my friends started to notice. One of them, Emily, pulled me aside one evening. She said, "You've changed. You don't laugh like you used to." I didn't know how to answer her. I wanted to tell her everything, that I wasn't okay, that I was lost between two worlds, but the words got stuck in my throat. So I just smiled and said I was tired. That night, I realized something painful but true. I wasn't just hiding from the world. I was hiding from myself. I was so afraid of losing people that I was slowly losing who I was. And that thought terrified me more than anything else. I spent that semester in a fog of confusion. Every day felt heavier than the last. I wanted to stop pretending, but I didn't know how. I'd look at the blouse tucked away in the closet, and it felt like a symbol of everything I couldn't say out loud. But even as the guilt ate away at me, there was a small, quiet part of me that refused to give up. The part that still believed there was more to life than fear. One cold evening, while walking back from class, I saw a small group gathered near the campus fountain. They were laughing, chatting, holding colorful flags I didn't recognize right away. Then I noticed the words written on a banner: Gender Expression Awareness. I stopped in my tracks. My heart raced. I didn't go closer, I couldn't. But from a distance, I watched them smile, free and unafraid. And for the first time I realized I wanted that too. Not just the clothes or the feeling of comfort, I wanted freedom. The kind that came from living honestly. That moment stayed with me long after I walked away. It was the first time I understood that what I was going through wasn't just confusion. It was discovery. Painful, messy, terrifying discovery. But it was also real. And deep down, I knew the conflict wouldn't end until I stopped running from it. The turning point of my life came quietly, without warning, as if the universe decided I'd run from myself long enough. By then, I had spent months wrestling with the same cycle: curiosity, guilt, denial, and longing. But the night that changed everything didn't start with any plan. It started with exhaustion. I had spent the entire day pretending to be fine, smiling through conversations, nodding through lectures, forcing laughter when I barely had the strength to exist. When I returned to my dorm, I locked the door and collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. I remember whispering to myself, I can't keep doing this. My voice cracked when I said it. For the first time I admitted it out loud. Not to anyone else but to myself. I didn't plan what happened next. I simply stood up, walked to the closet, and pulled out that same blouse. The fabric was worn from how many times I'd secretly touched it, but it still carried that strange, comforting power. I looked at it for a long time before finally putting it on. But this time I didn't stop there. I wanted to see who I really was beneath all the pretending. I pulled out a small box of things I had quietly collected. A brush, a hair clip, a little eyeliner someone had left in the shared bathroom. My hands trembled as I stood in front of the mirror. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. Slowly, carefully, I brushed my hair, clipped it to the side, and traced the faintest line along my eyes. I didn't know what I was doing, but somehow I knew exactly what it meant. When I finally looked up, I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. Not because they looked like someone else, but because for the first time they looked real. My heart raced, my chest felt light, and my eyes filled with tears. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was honest. I saw softness, vulnerability, and something else I'd never seen before. Peace. I remember whispering, "Hi," to my reflection, and then I smiled. A real smile, not the kind I wore to hide, but one that came from deep within. I didn't realize how much time had passed until I saw the clock. Hours had gone by without me noticing. I should have felt fear, but all I felt was relief. For once, I didn't feel like I was wearing a mask. I felt like I had taken one off. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. When I woke up, I didn't regret what I'd done. I was scared of what it meant, yes, but there was a quiet acceptance blooming inside me. Days turned into weeks, and I began exploring this side of myself in small, cautious steps. I'd wait for my roommate to leave, then take a few minutes to just be. Brush my hair, wear soft clothes, experiment with subtle makeup. These moments became my escape, but more importantly, they became my truth. The person I saw in the mirror wasn't just a reflection. She was a version of me that had been waiting for years to be acknowledged. I remember one morning I almost got caught again. I'd been standing by the window, lost in thought, when I heard the door unlock. Panic surged through me. I tore off the blouse, wiped my face, and threw on a hoodie. My roommate entered, glanced at me, and went about his business. He didn't notice anything, but I could feel my pulse hammering in my chest. After he left, I realized something. I didn't want to hide like that anymore. The fear was exhausting. I wanted to live without looking over my shoulder. I wanted to stop pretending that this part of me was something to be ashamed of. That realization became the seed of change. I started reading online, quietly, privately, about gender expression, about self-identity, about others who had gone through similar experiences. For the first time, I discovered that there were people like me, people who didn't fit neatly into labels but still found peace in expressing who they truly were. I wasn't alone. That simple fact changed everything. One day, I stumbled upon a small support group held off campus, a safe space for people exploring their identity. I hesitated for days before deciding to go. I told myself I'd just sit in the back, listen, and leave quietly. But when I entered that room, something inside me shifted. The people there were open, kind, and free. No one looked at me with judgment. No one asked why I was there. They just smiled. One person, a woman named Leah, sat beside me and said softly, "It's okay. You're safe here." Those words broke something in me. I hadn't felt that word in so long. That meeting changed everything. For the first time I said it out loud, that I had always felt drawn to my feminine side, that I didn't know why, and that it scared me. No one laughed. No one looked away. They just listened. I didn't realize I was crying until someone passed me a tissue. That night, walking back to my dorm, I felt lighter than I had in years. After that, things started to move in slow, steady waves. I didn't rush to label myself or make any grand declarations. I simply allowed myself to feel. I began to understand that embracing my feminine side wasn't about changing who I was. It was about uncovering who I'd always been. The softness I'd hidden, the emotions I'd buried, The parts of me I'd been told were too sensitive or too gentle. Those weren't weaknesses. They were me. Still, not everything was easy. There were nights when doubt came crashing back, when I'd look in the mirror and wonder if I was making a mistake, if I was fooling myself. There were moments when I felt like I didn't belong anywhere, caught between two worlds. But even in those moments I held on to something new. Hope. Because for the first time I could see a path forward, even if it was uncertain. I started journaling, writing down every emotion, every thought, every fear. It became my therapy, my conversation with the person I was becoming. I wrote about the small victories, the first time I walked outside wearing something that felt right, the first time I spoke in a softer tone and didn't feel the need to correct it, the first time I looked in the mirror and didn't feel shame. One evening as I was writing, Emily, the same friend who had asked if I was okay months ago, texted me asking if I wanted to hang out. I hesitated, then decided to tell her a little of what was going on. I didn't know what to expect, but when I finally said it, that I'd been exploring my feminine side, that I didn't fully understand it but it felt right, she smiled. She didn't laugh, didn't judge. She just said, "I'm proud of you." Those words hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds. For the first time, I realized that maybe I didn't have to go through this alone. From that day on, I began taking small, deliberate steps. With Emily's support, I went out for the first time in an outfit that reflected how I truly felt. It wasn't dramatic, just a soft sweater and jeans that fit differently. But walking through the city that evening, I felt like I was finally breathing fresh air. I noticed the way the wind brushed my hair, the way people smiled without staring, the way the world suddenly seemed wider, softer, and somehow more alive. That was the night I discovered something deeper than style or presentation. This wasn't just about clothes or appearance. It was about authenticity. Every time I allowed myself to express my femininity, I felt closer to the person I was meant to be. It wasn't an act. It wasn't a costume. It was a homecoming. But with discovery comes change. And change always brings consequences. I didn't know it then, but the closer I got to embracing my true self, the harder the world around me would push back. The discovery that brought me peace would soon test my strength in ways I never imagined. Acceptance didn't arrive like a sudden flash of light. It came slowly, quietly, like the tide, retreating and returning, washing away bits of my fear each time until what was left was something raw, real, and unshakably human. I wish I could say that once I discovered my truth, everything became easier. But that would be a lie. The truth didn't set me free overnight. It demanded courage I didn't know I had. It asked me to rebuild my entire idea of who I was, piece by piece, day by day. After that night with Emily, something inside me shifted. Having someone who understood, who didn't flinch or question, gave me the strength to breathe a little easier. She started calling me by softer nicknames, the kind that felt like warm sunlight on cold skin. Each time she did, I felt this strange mix of happiness and fear. Happiness because it felt right. Fear because it made everything real. There was no turning back now. I couldn't unsee the truth or unfeel the peace that came with it. I was beginning to live as myself, even if it was just in small, secret ways. But the world outside didn't pause to make space for my discovery. I still had to face classmates, family expectations, all the unspoken rules about who I was supposed to be. Every phone call from home felt like a test. My parents would ask how I was doing, how classes were going, if I was eating well. I'd answer politely, never mentioning the storm that was quietly reshaping me. I couldn't bear the thought of disappointing them, of seeing confusion or judgment in their eyes. But pretending was getting harder. Each time I hung up, I felt like I was betraying both them and myself. There was one day I remember vividly, a moment that forced me to confront what acceptance really meant. It was during a group presentation. I was wearing clothes that weren't explicitly feminine but had small details that felt more like me. Softer colors, a slimmer fit, subtle but intentional. One of my classmates made a casual remark. A joke that wasn't cruel but wasn't kind either. "You're looking different these days," he said with a smirk. "Trying something new." The group laughed lightly, but I didn't. My face flushed, my stomach tightened, and for a second I wanted to disappear. But instead of apologizing or changing the subject, I took a breath and said quietly, "Yeah, something like that." It wasn't much, but it was honest. And the world didn't end. That moment stayed with me because it was the first time I didn't hide or deny it. It was small, but it mattered. Each time I allowed myself to live truthfully, even in the smallest ways, it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost. Slowly, the shame that had followed me for years began to fade. I started spending more time with a support group. We'd talk about fears, progress, mistakes, and moments of joy. Some people there had gone through far more than I had, rejection, loss, even isolation, but they still smiled, still showed up, still believed in themselves. Their courage inspired me. It made me realize that acceptance isn't about waiting for the world to understand you. It's about understanding yourself even when the world doesn't. Emily became my anchor during those months. One evening we went out to a small cafe. I was wearing a cardigan that she'd helped me pick out, something soft and simple. When the waiter came to take our order, he smiled at us both without hesitation. No strange looks, no questions. It was such a normal moment, but to me it felt extraordinary. I realized how much I'd missed feeling ordinary. Blending in, existing without fear. That night, Emily told me something that stuck with me. "You don't need to earn the right to be yourself. You already are." Those words echoed in my mind for weeks. Still, there were setbacks. There were days when the fear crept back, when I'd hear whispers behind me, or notice someone staring too long, and all my confidence would crumble. There were nights I cried quietly, wondering if I'd ever truly fit anywhere. But each time, I reminded myself of that reflection in the mirror, the one that had looked back at me with softness and strength. That person was real. That person was worth fighting for. The hardest part, though, was facing my family. I knew I couldn't keep hiding forever. It wasn't about confessing something wrong. It was about sharing something true. I started small. During a video call, I mentioned I'd been exploring my sense of self. My mom looked puzzled, but she didn't press. My dad just nodded and asked if I was happy. That word, happy, hit me harder than I expected. I paused before answering, then said, "I think I'm starting to be." He smiled faintly and said, "That's good. That's what matters." I don't know if he understood what I really meant, but in that moment, I realized acceptance doesn't always come with grand gestures or perfect understanding. Sometimes it begins with small silences, the kind that hold space for love without needing explanation. Over time, I stopped dividing my life into separate boxes, the person I was in private and the person I showed to the world. I started blending them together, letting the lines blur until there was only one version of me left. Some people noticed, some didn't. A few asked questions, most didn't care. And slowly, the fear that once controlled every part of me began to lose its power. One afternoon, as I walked through the park wearing a light floral scarf, the same color as the one I'd held all those years ago in my sister's room, I caught my reflection in a store window. I stopped and looked. Not with shock or guilt, but with calm recognition. Smiled. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was pretending or performing. I was just existing, quietly, confidently, beautifully. That moment was when I understood what acceptance really meant. It wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about finally allowing myself to be who I'd always been beneath the layers of fear and expectation. My feminine side wasn't something to hide or fix. It was something to honor. It was the part of me that loved deeply, felt compassionately, and saw beauty in softness. It wasn't a weakness, it was my strength. From that day forward, I stopped asking permission to exist. I stopped apologizing for the way I walked, spoke, or expressed myself. I realized that being authentic didn't mean I had to fit anyone's definition of who I should be. It meant living in alignment with my truth, even when it was quiet, even when it was misunderstood. But as I stood there in that reflection, smiling at the person I'd fought so hard to become, I knew there was still one thing left. One truth I hadn't yet faced, one reason deeper than all the others that explained why I embraced my feminine side in the first place. That truth wasn't about clothing, identity, or appearance. It was about something far more personal, something that had been growing inside me all along, waiting for me to see it. The truth revealed itself not in a single flash of realization, but in moments, quiet, deeply human moments that wove together into something undeniable. I used to think embracing my feminine side was just about expression, about fabric and form, about seeing a softer reflection in the mirror. But it wasn't until much later that I understood the real reason behind it all. It wasn't about clothes or appearance. It was about healing. About finding the parts of myself I'd been taught to bury and finally giving them a place to breathe. It happened one evening, after years of quiet evolution. I was sitting by the window of my apartment, watching the city lights flicker like stars trapped between buildings. The air was calm, my favorite kind of silence, the kind that feels full rather than empty. I had just come back from a small gathering with friends, people who knew and accepted me for who I was. There had been laughter, stories, small moments of understanding that didn't need words. For the first time in years, I had felt like I belonged. When I looked into the window's reflection, I saw myself, truly saw myself. The makeup was subtle, my hair brushed to one side, a soft cardigan draped around me. But more than what I wore, I noticed the calm in my eyes. There was no more pretending, no more fear. Just me. And for the first time I didn't feel like two different people fighting for space. I was whole. That was when the truth clicked into place. I hadn't embraced my feminine side because I wanted to escape who I was. I had embraced it because it was the only way to find the parts of me that had been silenced. The gentle parts. Kind parts. The ones that cried easily, loved deeply, and saw beauty in fragility. For so long I'd been told that those parts were weaknesses, things to hide or harden. But embracing my femininity was how I learned to stop apologizing for them. It was how I learned to love them instead. I realized that all those years of struggle, the guilt, the confusion, the fear, weren't just battles against society's expectations. They were battles against my own learned shame. I had been at war with the idea that softness couldn't coexist with strength, that being sensitive made me less. But the more I lived authentically, the more I understood that strength and softness weren't opposites. They were parts of the same truth. I remembered something my mother once said when I was little. I had fallen off my bike and scraped my knee. I was trying not to cry, trying to be tough. She knelt beside me, wiped my tears and said, "Being brave doesn't mean you don't cry. It means you keep going even when you do." I didn't understand it then, but now, sitting by that window, I finally did. That was what my journey had been about all along, learning that bravery and vulnerability could live side by side. Embracing my feminine side wasn't a rebellion. It was a reconciliation, a way of making peace with every part of me I'd once rejected. It allowed me to nurture instead of suppress, to feel instead of flee, to see beauty where I once saw shame. It helped me understand that gender expression wasn't about limitation but liberation, the freedom to exist as fully, completely, unapologetically myself. There was another layer to it too, one I hadn't noticed until much later. By embracing my femininity, I also learned empathy in a way I never had before. I began to see the quiet strength in the women around me, the resilience it took to exist authentically in a world that constantly judged them. I learned to appreciate their grace, their patience, their courage. And in doing so, I found pieces of myself reflected in their stories. I realized that this part of me wasn't just about expression, it was about connection. One night, I visited my family after months of distance. I was nervous, unsure if they would see me differently, unsure if I was ready to face their questions. But when I walked through the door, my mother smiled. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, really looked the way only a mother can. Then she said softly, "You look peaceful." That was all. No judgment, no confusion, just love. My father didn't say much either, but I saw the acceptance in his silence. It wasn't perfect understanding, but it was enough. After dinner, my mother handed me something. A small, folded scarf. It was lavender, almost identical to the one I'd held all those years ago in my sister's room. "You used to like this color," she said. I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. That moment felt like the universe closing a circle that had taken years to complete. The scarf that had once symbolized confusion now symbolized peace. That night as I lay in bed, I thought about everything. The fear, the discovery, the acceptance. Every step had been painful and beautiful in equal measure. Every doubt had shaped me into someone stronger, softer, truer. I realized that the real reason I embraced my feminine side wasn't about changing who I was. It was about allowing myself to become who I'd always been beneath the fear. Because embracing my femininity taught me how to love myself. Not the version that fit in, not the one that others expected, but the one that had always existed quietly, waiting for me to stop hiding. It taught me that being true to yourself isn't a single decision. It's a lifetime of small, brave choices. Choices that say, "This is me," even when the world doesn't understand. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see conflict. I see balance. The strength and softness that coexist within me are no longer enemies. They are partners. I can be gentle and fierce, quiet and powerful, emotional and brave. I no longer measure myself by what I'm supposed to be. I define myself by what feels true. And that, I realized, is the real reason I embraced my feminine side, because it wasn't about becoming someone else. It was about coming home to myself. Every piece of fabric, every moment of reflection, every tear and every smile led me back here, to the simple, unshakable truth that I am whole exactly as I am. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that self-discovery is not a straight path. Twists, it hurts, it heals, and it surprises you. But every step, no matter how uncertain, brings you closer to peace. I used to think acceptance meant finding answers. Now I know it means finding harmony, with who you are, who you've been, and who you're becoming. So when people ask me why I did it, why I chose to embrace my feminine side, I tell them this. Because I got tired of living half a life. Because I wanted to see the person I truly was, not the version the world told me to be. Because authenticity, in all its messy, complicated beauty, is the only way to feel alive. And now, every time I tie that lavender scarf around my neck, I smile. Not because it makes me someone new, but because it reminds me of who I've always been. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to our channel.